All right, let's cut through the noise. You've been sitting there overthinking, stalking their social media, analyzing every photo, every post, trying to figure out if your avoidant ex has moved on. And let me guess, they look like they're thriving, right? They're posting gym selfies, hanging out with friends, and suddenly they're the life of the party. But here's the truth. What you're seeing isn't the full story. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and talk about what's really going on with someone who runs from intimacy, shuts down in the face of emotional connection, and seems to bounce back like nothing ever happened. Spoiler alert, it's not what you think. And once you understand how avoidant attachment actually works, you'll stop blaming yourself, stop second guessing everything, and start reclaiming your power. Let's get into it when you look at your avoidant ex on social media or hear through mutual friends that they're out and about, living life like nothing happened. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking they've completely moved on. Maybe they're dating someone new. Maybe they're posting pictures at concerts, working out, traveling, or throwing themselves into work or hobbies. On the surface, it looks like they're fine, like the relationship didn't impact them, like they're emotionally miles ahead of you. And naturally, that stings. It can make you question everything. Was the connection even real? Did they ever care? Why are they okay while you're over here trying to breathe through the ache? But here's the thing. What you're seeing is an illusion. It's not the full story. Avoidant individuals are masters of emotional suppression. They're hardwired to disconnect when things get too intimate, too vulnerable, or too emotionally overwhelming. And the breakup, no matter how it happened, likely triggered exactly that kind of emotional chaos in them. Their response: shut down, pull away, appear unbothered. Unlike secure individuals who deal with emotional pain by processing it, talking through it, or even sitting with it until it makes sense, avoidants do the opposite. Their entire nervous system is programmed to seek distance as a form of self-protection. When their emotional world feels unsafe, they don't dive in, they retreat. So when the breakup happens, especially if it was emotionally intense or there were vulnerable moments leading up to it, their instinct is to immediately create space between themselves and the pain. That space often looks like moving on. But in truth, it's just avoidance dressed up as healing. You need to understand that moving on for an avoidant is often just another layer of defense. It's not healing, it's coping. And coping mechanisms can look incredibly productive from the outside. They might throw themselves into a new relationship, not because they're ready to emotionally connect again, but because the distraction helps them bypass the emotional discomfort they never learned to tolerate. They may get into a rebound situation, which can look like they've replaced you, but what's actually happening is emotional bypassing. They don't want to sit in the aftermath of the breakup. They want out fast, because emotional depth is scary for them and heartbreak requires you to go there. That's why it's not uncommon for avoidants to be the ones who appear to recover faster. They're not actually recovering, they're just running. You might also see them engaging in what looks like self-improvement, going to the gym, working more, picking up hobbies. And yes, those things are healthy. But timing matters. When someone jumps straight from a breakup into hyperproductivity without acknowledging or processing the emotional reality of what happened, that's not growth. That's avoidance. It's them trying to control their environment so they don't have to feel the mess inside. It's easier to count calories or lift weights or answer emails than it is to confront the real questions like, why did I push that person away? Why do I struggle with closeness? Why do I feel relief and sadness at the same time? It's also crucial to remember that many avoidants have learned through childhood or early relationships that emotional detachment equals safety. If they grew up in an environment where vulnerability was punished, neglected, or led to chaos, then moving on quickly is not just a choice, it's a survival tactic. It's how they learn to stay in control. It's not about you, it's about their wiring. But when you're the one left in the wreckage, trying to make sense of it all, it's easy to personalize their distance as indifference. It's not. It's protection. Dysfunctional, yes, but not heartless. Now, this doesn't mean you should wait around hoping that one day they'll realize what they lost. That's not the point. The point is to understand the truth of what you're seeing so you can stop torturing yourself. Because the pain you're feeling is real, and the worst thing you can do is compare your internal experience to their external presentation. They may look like they've skipped the healing process, but in reality, they've just postponed it. The feelings they're running from will surface maybe weeks, months, or even years later. That's not your burden to carry anymore. What is your responsibility is to stop romanticizing their emotional distance as strength. Stop assuming their silence means resolution. And stop believing the illusion that because they're not falling apart publicly, They must be fine. Healing doesn't always look loud, and neither does avoidance, but one moves you forward. The other just keeps you stuck. So next time you find yourself scrolling through their Instagram, comparing your heartbreak to their highlight reel, remind yourself, this isn't the full picture. Their version of moving on may just be another way to avoid feeling the very things that you are bravely confronting. And that's your power. That's your edge. That's the truth they're running from and the truth you're facing head on. To truly understand what's going on with your avoidant ex, you have to start by understanding what avoidant attachment actually is. Because until you get how they're wired, how their brain and body respond to closeness, connection, and emotional intimacy, you'll keep misinterpreting their actions. You'll keep thinking they didn't care. You'll keep taking their silence personally. You'll keep spinning in self-doubt, trying to decode what went wrong. But avoidant attachment isn't about you. It's about them, and it runs deep. Avoidant attachment typically begins in childhood. Somewhere along the line, usually very early on, they learned that emotional closeness wasn't safe, consistent, or comforting. Maybe they had parents or caregivers who were emotionally distant, overly critical, or simply unavailable. Maybe they were expected to be independent far too young. Or maybe when they did express vulnerability, they were met with neglect or punishment. Whatever the case, the result was the same. They learned not to rely on others, not because they didn't want connection, but because it was risky. So they adapted. They learned to self-soothe by shutting down. They developed the belief, consciously or not, that needing someone else is weak, and that emotional intimacy leads to pain or rejection. That belief follows them into adulthood, especially in romantic relationships. Now fast forward to your relationship with them. In the beginning, it may have felt amazing. They probably came across as confident, independent, even a little mysterious. There was likely a strong attraction, a magnetic pull. Avoidants often have a calm, collected exterior that can feel grounding to people who are more emotionally open or anxious. But as the relationship got deeper, more emotional, more intimate, things started to shift. Maybe they became more distant. Maybe they pulled away after a vulnerable moment or disappeared after things were going well. Maybe they became hyper-focused on your flaws, questioning the relationship right when it started to feel safe. That's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. What you experienced was their attachment system kicking in. For someone with avoidant attachment, closeness actually triggers fear. The more emotionally connected they feel, the more they feel their independence is at risk. That doesn't mean they don't love or care. It means that the act of loving itself feels threatening. Emotional intimacy turns on alarm bells in their nervous system. Where someone with a secure or even anxious attachment style might move closer in moments of connection, an avoidant moves back to them, space equals safety. This is why you may have felt like you were always chasing emotional breadcrumbs, trying to get them to open up, trying to make the relationship feel deeper, more real, more mutual. And it probably worked in brief moments. Maybe they'd let their guard down for a night or a weekend, and you'd think, finally, we're getting somewhere. But then right after, they'd shut down again. That's not because you did something wrong. It's because vulnerability for them feels like exposure. It triggers discomfort, even panic. They may not even be fully aware of it. Many avoidants don't have the language for what they're feeling. They just know something feels off, and their reflex is to pull away or create distance. When breakups happen with someone who's avoidant, this attachment style becomes even more pronounced. They often cope by emotionally detaching even further, cutting contact, disappearing, acting like it didn't affect them. But this isn't strength, it's defense. It's their way of avoiding the emotional intensity that they don't know how to sit with. They might even reframe the relationship in a cold or dismissive way, rewriting the story to minimize their emotional involvement. Again, this isn't about you, it's about their need to regain a sense of control by disconnecting from the emotional reality of the breakup. What's even more confusing is that avoidants do feel. They have emotions. They may feel deep sadness, guilt, or even longing after a breakup, but they're highly skilled at compartmentalizing those feelings. They may only allow themselves to feel them in isolated, quiet moments and then push them back down. They don't typically talk about their feelings, even to close friends, and they rarely seek out support. Vulnerability just doesn't feel like a safe or familiar option for them. The sad truth is that many avoidant individuals want connection, but fear it at the same time. It's a painful paradox. They crave love but feel suffocated by it. And because they often don't do the work to understand their attachment style, They live in a cycle of getting close, shutting down, pushing away, and wondering why nothing lasts. If they don't face those patterns head on, they carry them into every relationship. That's why it's a mistake to assume they'll be different with the next person. Until they confront their emotional avoidance, the cycle repeats no matter who they're with. So if you're wondering why things felt so confusing, why they pulled away right when you were getting close, or why they seem so indifferent now, understand this. Their behavior isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their attachment blueprint. You didn't cause their avoidance. You just triggered it by getting too close. And while that might hurt, it's also the clarity you need to stop internalizing the distance. You were not too much. You were simply more open than they were ready to handle. The good news, this knowledge is power. When you understand avoid attachment, you stop personalizing the pain. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. And you start realizing that real intimacy, deep, mutual, emotionally safe love can't exist with someone who's constantly running from it. When someone with an avoidant attachment style cuts off communication after a breakup, it's incredibly easy to interpret that silence as closure. You might assume they've moved on. You might think their lack of contact means they've made peace with the breakup or that they've emotionally detached in a healthy, final way. After all, they're not reaching out. They're not fighting for the relationship. They're not even checking in. It feels cold. It feels fine. It feels like you didn't matter as much as you thought. But that silence, it's not closure. It's avoidance. Plain and simple. Avoidants have a very specific way of dealing with discomfort by not dealing with it at all. When something hurts, feels overwhelming, or threatens their sense of independence, their instinct is to retreat, disconnect, and bury the emotion. They don't want to feel it, name it, or sit with it. They want it gone. And in the case of a breakup, especially one that stirred up any kind of emotional vulnerability, their first line of defense is silence. Silence gives them space. It gives them control. It lets them feel like they're managing the emotional chaos by removing themselves from the equation entirely. But here's what's critical to understand. Silence is not the same thing as resolution. Just because they're not talking about the breakup doesn't mean they're over it. Just because they're not reaching out doesn't mean they don't have feelings. Avoidants often use silence as a wall, a form of emotional numbing. It's a way to suppress the discomfort that they either don't have the tools to process or don't feel safe enough to face. So when they go quiet, it's not necessarily because they've found peace. It's often because they're trying to avoid pain. Now, from your perspective, that silence can feel like rejection. It can feel like abandonment. You might keep asking yourself, how can they walk away so easily? How can they not even say goodbye properly? Don't they want to talk about what happened? Those are normal human responses because you're wired for connection. You probably process emotion by talking through it, by making sense of it, by looking for meaning and closure. And so their silence feels brutal, like emotional cruelty even. But to them, that same silence feels like safety. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves from what they see as a threat, emotional exposure. This is also why reaching out to an avoidant ex after the breakup can feel so one-sided. You may pour your heart out in a message, hoping for clarity, hoping for something real, and they respond with a few words, or not at all. It feels dismissive. It feels cold. But again, it's not because your message didn't land, it's because it did. And that emotional intensity is exactly what they're trying to avoid. Vulnerable conversations are uncomfortable for them, especially when they're already overwhelmed by the emotional residue of the breakup. So they shut it down. That doesn't mean they don't care. It means they don't know how to show that they care in a way that feels emotionally safe for them. Another layer to this is the way avoidants mentally reframe the breakup. In order to justify their silence and avoid guilt, they may start rewriting the story in their head, downplaying their emotional investment, focusing on your flaws, or convincing themselves that the relationship wasn't right all along. This internal narrative helps them rationalize the distance they're creating. It allows them to disconnect from the emotional complexity of what happened. But again, that's not closure, it's denial. It's self-protection. And if you're waiting for them to come back and give you the heartfelt explanation or apology you deserve, you may be waiting a long time, not because they don't owe it to you, but because giving it would require a level of emotional vulnerability they aren't ready for. So what does this mean for you? It means that real closure probably isn't going to come from them. And that's a hard truth to accept, but it's also a freeing one. Because once you stop looking to them for answers they can't give, you start turning inward for healing. You start realizing that their silence is not a statement about your worth. It's a statement about their emotional limitations. Closure, especially with an avoidant ex, isn't about getting the final word from them. It's about understanding the dynamic for what it truly was. It's about recognizing the pattern and stepping out of it. And maybe somewhere down the line they'll reflect. Maybe they'll feel the things they're currently suppressing. But that's not your journey to track anymore. The silence they've chosen is their coping strategy, not your closure. It's not evidence that they didn't love you. It's not proof that you were forgettable. It's just a protective wall built from years of emotional conditioning. And once you see that, you stop pounding on that wall, hoping it will come down. You start building your own foundation, stronger, wiser, more whole, without needing them to validate the pain they helped cause. That's how you take your power back. Not by waiting for a message that may never come, but by choosing to heal anyway, choosing to rise anyway, choosing to give yourself the closure they couldn't or wouldn't offer, because silence might be their way of coping, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. Avoidant individuals often seem emotionally detached after a breakup, and their ability to carry on as if nothing happened can feel deeply confusing, even hurtful. But what most people don't realize is that beneath that calm, composed surface are layers of coping mechanisms, patterns they've relied on for years to avoid discomfort, vulnerability, and emotional depth. These coping strategies aren't obvious at first glance. In fact, they often look like strength, independence, or even growth. But if you look closer, you'll see that many of their behaviors are actually just ways to stay emotionally disengaged and in control. One of the most common coping tools avoidants use is emotional suppression. Instead of feeling their feelings, they push them down, ignore them, or distract themselves until the emotions are quiet enough to forget. They might not even be aware that they're doing it. It's a default setting in their nervous system. Feeling too much, too deeply, too fast, that's a red flag in their brain. So their response is to shut it down. That's why they might look fine on the outside. They've trained themselves to be fine by disconnecting from their inner world whenever it starts to feel overwhelming. It's not that they're unbothered, it's that they've learned not to let themselves be bothered. Another key coping mechanism is hyperindependence. Avoidants often pride themselves on not needing anyone. After a breakup, this can show up as an intense focus on self-sufficiency. They might double down on work, start new routines, pick up new hobbies, or emphasize how good it feels to be alone. This can be incredibly frustrating to witness, especially if you're struggling with the emotional weight of the breakup. But this isn't about self-growth. It's about self-protection. For them, independence isn't just a value, it's a shield. The more they can convince themselves that they don't need anyone, the safer they feel. Needing someone means risking pain, rejection, and vulnerability. So they armor up with independence to avoid all of that. Rebounds are another coping strategy, though not always in the way people think. When an avoidant starts seeing someone new shortly after a breakup, it might look like they've replaced you. It might look like they've moved on effortlessly. But often, that new relationship isn't about connection. It's about distraction. Being with someone new keeps them from facing the emotional fallout of the breakup. It gives them something to focus on, something that doesn't require them to feel what they've buried. These relationships are typically surface level, lacking in real vulnerability. Because the goal isn't intimacy, it's avoidance. And if the new person starts getting emotionally close, the same cycle of distancing and detachment usually repeats. Another thing avoidance often do is rewrite the story of the relationship to suit their need for distance. They may downplay their feelings, highlight the problems, or convince themselves that you were never really compatible. This reframing allows them to avoid guilt and justify the emotional wall they've built. It also gives them a sense of control. Breakups bring uncertainty and emotional messiness, things avoidants hate. So by telling themselves a story that minimizes the significance of the relationship, they can feel like they've made a clean break, even if deep down they're still carrying unresolved emotions. Distraction is also a big one. Avoidants often keep themselves busy after a breakup, socializing more, working late, taking on new projects, or constantly entertaining themselves. Again, this can make it look like they're thriving. But a packed schedule can be a way to outrun silence and solitude, both of which might trigger the emotions they're trying to suppress. Stillness is dangerous for an avoidant because it creates space for feelings to surface. So they fill every moment with something, anything, to keep those feelings at bay. You might also notice that avoidants rarely talk about the breakup. They won't process it with friends. They won't reflect openly. And they definitely won't reach out to you to talk about what went wrong. This isn't because they don't have thoughts or feelings. It's because talking about it makes the emotions real. And real emotions are uncomfortable. Vulnerability is a muscle they never learn to use. So they default to silence, denial, or quick dismissals. They may even tell people they're over it or that it wasn't that deep. But the truth is, they're trying to convince themselves just as much as they're trying to convince others. All of these behaviors are protective. They're not malicious, but they are misguided. These coping mechanisms are how avoidants survive emotional pain without ever fully facing it. And while they may work in the short term, they often leave the avoidant emotionally stuck, repeating the same patterns in every relationship. The walls they build don't just keep others out, they keep themselves locked in. So if you're watching your avoidant ex live their life like nothing happened, understand this. What you're seeing is not healing. It's hiding. They're not thriving. They're surviving. And doing it in the only way they know how. That doesn't mean they didn't care. It means caring scares them. It means feeling is unfamiliar territory. It means their version of coping is actually just a long, drawn-out form of emotional evasion. And while it's painful to know they may never give you the validation or closure you're craving, it's also liberating, because now you can stop chasing their silence for answers. You can stop interpreting their distance as emotional strength. And you can start recognizing that true healing, your healing comes not from understanding their behavior, but from choosing to break the cycle they're still trapped in. One of the most confusing things about dealing with an avoidant ex is seeing them move on quickly, seemingly without any emotional fallout. They might post pictures with someone new, dive into the dating world with confidence, or even appear happier than they ever were with you. It hits like a punch to the gut, especially if you're still processing the breakup, still grieving, still trying to understand what happened. But here's what most people don't realize. Avoidants often move on quickly, not because they're over you, but because it helps them bypass the uncomfortable emotions they refuse to face. Avoidant attachment is built around emotional self-protection. These individuals are wired to fear closeness, vulnerability, and dependence. When a relationship ends, instead of sitting in the grief, facing their pain, or reflecting on what they may have contributed to the breakup, they instinctively seek to numb. And one of the most convenient ways to do that is to pursue a new relationship, not because they're ready to connect deeply again, but because being with someone new provides distraction, validation, and a sense of emotional safety, at least on the surface. When an avoidant gets into a new relationship quickly, it's often what psychologists call a protest behavior. It's a way of managing the discomfort of loss by proving to themselves, and maybe even to you, that they're fine, that they're desirable, that they're still in control. But underneath the new selfies, flirty messages, and stories about how great everything is, the emotional reality often remains untouched. Because the truth is, if they didn't face their issues with you, they haven't healed. And if they haven't healed, they're just bringing the same unresolved patterns into a new connection. It's important to understand that for avoidance, emotional closeness is the trigger, not necessarily the person. So when they move on to someone new, the early stages of that relationship often feel easier. Why? Because new relationships are low pressure. They haven't had to be vulnerable yet. There's no emotional history, no conflicts, no deep expectations. It's still light, still surface level. And in that phase, avoidance can function well. They can present themselves as charming, interesting, even emotionally available, because nothing has yet threatened their need for emotional distance. This is why it's a mistake to assume they've changed just because they're with someone else. Avoidants don't suddenly become secure overnight. Unless they've done deep inner work like therapy, reflection, and honest emotional growth, they're likely repeating the same pattern. The same fear of intimacy, the same tendency to pull away once emotional needs arise, the same avoidance of hard conversations, accountability, or true closeness. So while it may look like they're doing better, what's really happening is a repeat cycle just waiting for the next trigger to surface. You may also notice that avoidants often idealize the new person in the beginning. They might talk about how easy the new relationship is, how different it feels, or how compatible they are. This idealization isn't about reality. It's about escaping emotional discomfort. They're not necessarily in love. They're in relief. Relief that they don't have to feel the things they didn't want to feel after the breakup. Relief that they can still have companionship without confronting the emotional baggage they carry. And this phase often doesn't last, because once the honeymoon period fades, and the new person begins to seek emotional depth, the same avoidant patterns usually emerge again. On your side of this, it's tempting to compare yourself to the new person, to wonder what they have that you didn't, to spiral into self-doubt. But that's where you have to ground yourself in the truth. This isn't about your worth. It's about their wounds. It's about their fear of intimacy, their discomfort with vulnerability, and their need to feel in control at all times. You didn't cause those things, and you couldn't have fixed them either. The sad part is most avoidants don't even realize they're doing this. They may genuinely believe they're ready for something new. They may even believe that the new relationship is different, but without doing the inner emotional work, they're just rearranging the same furniture in a different house. It might feel new, but it's the same living pattern. And if you're still grieving while they're already dating again, don't mistake your slower process as weakness. What you're doing, feeling, processing, reflecting, is real healing. It's not flashy, it doesn't come with an instant ego boost, but it's the only way to truly break the cycle. Because while they might be distracting themselves with someone new, you're doing the work that will actually set you free. You're learning what it means to confront emotion rather than escape it. You're growing in ways they may not even understand yet. So the next time you see them posting like everything's fine or jumping into a new relationship with ease, remember, speed isn't healing, distraction isn't resolution, and a new partner doesn't mean they've suddenly evolved. Real change takes time, it takes effort, it takes courage, and while they might be avoiding the pain today, pain that isn't felt doesn't disappear. It waits. It resurfaces later, usually in the exact same ways that broke the last relationship. Let their coping mechanisms stay theirs. You don't have to take it on. Your journey may be slower, but it's also more honest. And that honesty is what leads to true peace, something no rebound or romantic distraction can ever offer. One of the most misleading things about an avoidant ex is how indifferent they can appear after the breakup. They might not reach out. They might not seem sad. They might not show any of the typical signs of emotional struggle. This can leave you feeling abandoned, even erased. It can make you question the entire relationship. Was it ever real? Did they ever care? How can someone who claimed to love you be so completely unaffected now? But here's the truth most people don't understand. Avoidants don't process pain the way others do. They don't wear their wounds on the surface. They suppress them. And just because they're not showing you the pain doesn't mean they're not carrying it. Avoidants are masters of emotional compartmentalization. When something feels too heavy, too intense, too emotionally messy, their instinct is to put it in a box, lock it away, and move on. On the outside, it looks like emotional stability or even strength. But inside, there's a backlog of unresolved emotion that they haven't fully acknowledged, let alone dealt with. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they've spent years teaching themselves not to feel too much because vulnerability is unsafe territory. This emotional suppression doesn't mean they don't think about you. In fact, many avoidants ruminate more than they let on. They'll replay conversations, rethink the dynamic, and experience a kind of emotional discomfort they can't quite name. But because they don't know how to process those emotions in a healthy way, they keep it all inside. Sometimes it leaks out in moments they don't expect. Sudden irritation, sadness they can't explain, dreams or triggers that bring you to mind. But instead of sitting with those feelings, they'll double down on distraction, denial, or isolation. What's even more confusing is that avoidance might appear completely fine until much later. That's because they often experience delayed emotional reactions. When the dust is settled and there's no more pressure, no more conflict, no more expectation for emotional closeness, they start to feel safe again. And that's when the emotions they avoided begin to rise. It might be months after the breakup when they finally begin to feel the weight of the loss. And because they've suppressed it for so long, it can hit them harder than they expect, but they rarely show it, especially to you. Avoidants struggle with regret too, though they may never admit it. Regret requires vulnerability. It means acknowledging that they hurt someone or that they pushed away something good. That kind of self-awareness is hard for someone who spent their life avoiding emotional discomfort, but it does happen. Late night thoughts, moments of quiet, a picture that resurfaces, a place that reminds them of you. These small things bring your memory back in ways they didn't anticipate. And for a moment, they'll feel that ache. They might even think about reaching out, but often they don't because reconnecting means reopening emotional doors they've worked so hard to close. What makes this even harder for you is that they probably won't ever tell you any of this. You won't get the message that says, "I've been thinking about you," or "I regret how things ended." Avoidants tend to avoid those conversations because they don't know how to navigate the emotional intensity that comes with them. It's not that they don't feel, it's that feeling makes them feel out of control. And for avoidance, control is safety. It's also worth noting that avoidants tend to minimize their emotional responses, even to themselves. They convince themselves that they're okay, that the breakup was necessary, that they didn't need the relationship as much as it seemed. This internal narrative is part of their self-protection. It helps them stay detached. It keeps them from slipping into emotional vulnerability. But just because they've convinced themselves doesn't mean the story is true. Deep down, the pain is still there. It's just buried under layers of logic, rationalization, and emotional armor. This is why you need to be careful not to internalize their silence as proof that you didn't matter. Silence is not a lack of emotion. It's a lack of emotional expression. It's a sign that they don't know how to feel safely, not that they don't feel at all. And while that might not give you the comfort or closure you want, it does give you clarity. It helps you understand that your pain isn't one-sided. It's just being processed differently, or in their case, not processed at all. You might never see their heartbreak. You might never hear their apology, but that doesn't mean they walked away untouched. The absence of visible pain doesn't mean absence of feeling. It means their feelings are hidden, unspoken, or so deeply repressed that even they haven't unpacked them. And that is not your burden to carry anymore. Your healing can't be dependent on their ability to show emotion. You're allowed to feel deeply, even if they don't. You're allowed to grieve, to cry, to remember, to miss them, and also to let go. Because the path you're on is honest. It's real. It's grounded in emotional truth. Theirs might be quieter, buried, or delayed, but that doesn't make your process any less valid. They may still think of you. They may still feel the loss in moments they'll never speak about. But whether or not they show it, the chapter you shared mattered. It just ended in a way that reveals their limitations, not your worth. And that understanding that their silence isn't absence but avoidance might be the closure you didn't know you needed. Now here's something no one really warns you about. Your avoidant ex might come back. And when they do, it can stir up a flood of emotion, hope, confusion, validation, maybe even a desire to rekindle what was lost. Because when someone who seemed emotionally detached suddenly resurfaces, it feels like proof they cared after all. It feels like maybe they finally realized what they lost. Maybe they've changed. Maybe the love you had wasn't one-sided after all. But this is where you have to pause and really understand what's going on, because avoidants don't come back for the reasons most people want to believe. When an avoidant returns, it's rarely because they've done the deep emotional work to heal, grow, and become capable of the intimacy they once avoided. It's usually because they're feeling something uncomfortable, loneliness, regret, curiosity, or nostalgia, and reaching back to you is familiar or once their emotional home, even if they didn't know how to be present in it. So when the distraction wears off, when the rebound fades, or when being alone starts to feel too heavy, they often circle back to what felt safe, even if they were the ones who pushed it away. Here's the difficult part. Avoidants often miss the idea of you more than the reality of emotional intimacy with you. They miss the comfort, the attention, the connection, without wanting the vulnerability, the emotional responsibility, or the closeness that comes with a healthy relationship. It's not always malicious. Sometimes they truly believe they want to reconnect, but what they're chasing is a feeling, not a commitment. And once that initial emotional hit wears off, once you start expecting depth again, they often begin to retreat, just like they did before. It's a cycle. Avoidant returns, rekindles connection, gets close, feels emotionally triggered, and pulls away, over and over. And if you're not aware of what's happening, you can get pulled into a roller coaster of hope and disappointment that leaves you more confused than ever. It's not because you did anything wrong. It's because their emotional wiring doesn't allow them to hold intimacy and safety at the same time. They crave closeness, but fear what it requires. And unless they've gone through significant emotional growth, they're not coming back as a different person. They're coming back as the same avoidant who couldn't show up before. You may even notice that they return in moments of personal instability, after a breakup, during a career setback, when they feel emotionally lost. That's because avoidants seek emotional refuge when they're overwhelmed, but they don't want to stay in that vulnerable place for long. So they reach for someone familiar, you, someone who once made them feel seen, understood, valued. And for a moment, reconnecting feels like relief. But unless they're willing to stay in the emotional discomfort that intimacy brings, it doesn't last. What's especially painful is that their return can look a lot like love. They may say they miss you. They may apologize. They may even talk about wanting to try again. But love, real love, isn't about words. It's about presence, consistency, emotional availability, accountability. And if you look closely, you'll often find that what they're offering isn't love, it's comfort. It's emotional bandaging. It's a temporary escape from the discomfort they don't want to face alone. So what do you do when they come back? You get honest with yourself. Ask, have they changed, or are they just uncomfortable? Are they here for connection or for comfort? Are they willing to do the emotional work, or are they repeating the same cycle? You have to remember what it felt like when they weren't showing up, when you were emotionally starving, when you questioned your worth because they couldn't open up. That wasn't about you. That was about their fear, their avoidance, their emotional limitations. And unless that part of them has changed, the outcome will likely be the same. You also need to know that closure doesn't always come in the form of final words or explanations. Sometimes closure is seeing the pattern clearly enough that you no longer need to play a role in it. Sometimes closure is realizing that just because someone comes back doesn't mean they're meant to stay. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to feel tempted. You're human, but you're also wise. You've seen what happens when you give and wait for them to meet you emotionally, and they never do. Don't trade your peace for potential. Don't trade your healing for history. If they truly changed, it would show in action, in consistency, in emotional depth, not just in a sudden message or a nostalgic conversation. Let their return be information, not a promise. Let it show you where they are. Let it show you how far you've come. You're not the same person who accepted breadcrumbs just to feel close. You've grown, you've felt the pain, you've sat with it, and you've used it to rise. And you deserve someone who doesn't just come back, but someone who stays emotionally present, open, and all in. That's not too much to ask. That's the bare minimum. So here's the truth, the kind that stings at first, but frees you in the long run. Your avoidant ex didn't move on the way it might seem. They didn't suddenly become healed, whole, or emotionally available overnight. What they did was protect themselves. The only way they know how, by avoiding, by numbing, by distracting. And while you were deep in your grief, questioning everything, wondering if you mattered, they were simply doing what they've always done, running from discomfort and dressing it up as strength. Because you're not here to play small just to make someone else comfortable. You're not here to chase emotional breadcrumbs or try to decode silence. You're not here to carry the weight of a relationship by yourself, hoping that someone will meet you halfway when they're not even willing to stand still and feel. You loved with depth. You showed up. You were real. And maybe they didn't know how to receive that. But it wasn't wasted, because everything you gave, your time, your heart, your effort, was a reflection of your capacity to love. That's your power. That's your proof. And that's what's going to carry you forward. Let them avoid. Let them distract. Let them pretend they're fine. That's their path. But you're healing. You're growing. You're learning how to love yourself the way you always hoped they would. And one day when you're fully grounded in your truth, when you've reclaimed every piece of yourself that got lost trying to hold on to someone who couldn't stay, you'll look back and realize this wasn't just heartbreak. This was your breakthrough. You didn't lose them. You found you. And that's the real victory.